LSV, welcome back once again. I know you are a glutton for punishment because you just seem to really be sinking your teeth into Yu-Gi-Oh! The more we do these videos. How you feeling?
Oh, great. You're really incepting me here. The more I learn about these cards, you know. But I've been having a really good time with this, and glad to be back. Though I did want to mention for maybe your viewers that this will be the last one with me for at least a little while because
yeah, it will be.
Me and my wife are having twins. Well, she's having twins. I'm going to be there in about
congratulations.
2 weeks. Thank you.
Congratulations.
We're very excited and nervous, but it's going to be. I'm going to go on a little bit of a sabbatical from basically anything that I don't have to do. So unfortunately, that is this for a while. But I will no doubt be back if you'll have me.
Of course. We will miss you, but we will love to have you back once everything is settled on your end. And so to kick off our temporary hiatus here for our last video for the foreseeable future, I thought we'd do something that's a lot of fun. You're really starting to get the grasp of the game, and I wanted to explore a mechanic of the game that's very popular by modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards, and that is what is called hand traps. So you're familiar with trap cards and the fact that they are cards that you can use, you know, essentially at instant speed in response to things that your opponent is doing. Hand traps are monsters that have quick effects that you would use them from the hand, essentially in a similar sense as regular trap cards. But these are very popular because they also have the dual function of being monster cards as well, so they're a bit more flexible in that regard. And modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is absolutely just littered with these types of cards, and we're going to be doing the hand trap history, if you will. We're going to be going through most of them, and I'm excited to see what you think about this just mechanic as a whole. So what do you think on the surface?
Your opponent, when you have a normal trap, you play it right face down, and then they know you've got a trap in play, but they don't know what it is, and then they maybe walk into it, maybe not. With hand traps, they don't even know, like they know that you could have one, but there's no indication that you do until you play it, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's quite a bit more difficult to play around for sure.
Exactly, especially since, as you've learned, hand destruction / like hand knowledge in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is something that we don't really have very often. So as long as your opponent has a card in hand, there could possibly be a hand trap. So let's start with the absolute classic hand trap here. Your goal today is to evaluate these cards if you think if they're good or not, but also none of these cards were banned, but some of them may or may not have been restricted or limited in our sense to one copy. So you're going to try to guess if any of them in your thought are powerful enough to be restricted. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, let's start with the absolute classic.
Kuriboh is a 1-star, 300/200. It's a fiend effect. During damage calculation, if your opponent's monster attacks, you can discard this card and you take no battle damage from that battle. Oh, okay. So
this is the first hand trap they ever printed in the second set.
Gotcha. So you can basically discard this to stop a monster from hitting you.
Correct.
But you wouldn't be able to save one of your own monsters.
No. So the monster would still be destroyed, but any damage that you would take from that battle would go to 0.
Okay. This doesn't on its face look super powerful to me, but stopping like a big attack, especially if there's like decks that are trying to like gear up for a big attack and that's what they're trying to combo or whatever, this could prevent that. But yeah, I mean, it looks like a cool card. I would definitely expect to make this as a hand trap. Like, if you were to tell me, okay, you've got to design 20 hand traps, this is the kind of, I would expect that some effect like this to appear within it. It's like a pretty clean effect. Doesn't seem super powerful, but I could believe it would be.
Okay. Do you think, out of curiosity, do you think this was playable? Like, do you think people actually played this card?
I would say no, except if there's a deck that's trying to like combo. Like, I remember one of the combos you showed me. I don't remember the names anymore. You put the continuous effect on your creature or your monster that made it deal a ton of extra damage, like that was like one of the one-turn kill combos or whatever. Like, this would stop that sort of thing. Then it would be good if people were trying to do that to you. If they weren't, it feels like you're down a card to prevent some damage, which most card games, that's not a great exchange.
Sure. So you don't think it's particularly good, so I'm assuming you don't think it was restricted
in
any sense then. All right, final answer?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
He's too good, ladies and gentlemen. You actually hit it right on the nose. So yeah, Kuriboh, this is a card from the anime. Everyone loves Kuriboh. He's very cute. He's one of our like little mascots.
I've even heard the name before.
Yeah, it's you might have heard it. It's one of those like, you know, secondary cards. It's not a Blue Eyes White Dragon or a Dark Magician, but he's around. He's a cute little guy. And it's funny because for the most part, Kuriboh's bad. But in the exact instance that you mentioned, there was a small stint of time where people did actually side deck Kuriboh in case case they were playing an opponent that was playing one of these like one-turn OTK decks, because there are plenty of tutors in our game, as you've come to learn.
Yeah.
So if the opponent was trying to clear the way for their big monster to get in to end the game, that tutor could then search Kuriboh, because Kuriboh is very tutorable through a lot of means for people watching Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, etc. So then they actually could buy themselves a turn and maybe get them on the crackback, so the combo essentially just didn't work, right? And so it was like the only time this card has ever seen play, but it's still cool that, you know, there's been a very like corner case situation that this card has actually seen a tiny bit of play. Very fun.
Magic has cards like this that are a fog is the original one from the first Magic set. Prevent all damage creatures would deal this turn. And basically they're always bad, or there's a deck that uses so many of them that is really, really unfun to play against. So it's the kind of effect that doesn't go wrong unless it goes really wrong usually.
So I just wanted to throw this one out here for fun. This one's not particularly good. The rest of these, I will actually say, are probably at least like playable to an extent. So do keep that in mind as we go forward. Here is probably the actual first hand trap. We're actually going to be going in a chronological order on release here. So this is
I love it.
cool.
I'm getting this like historical view of Yu-Gi-Oh! Through the lens of typically very powerful cards. But I mean, those are the standouts, right? DD Crow is 100-100. It's extremely small. Quick effect. You can discard this card to the graveyard, then target one card in your opponent's graveyard, banish that target. Yeah, I mean, I could see the use for this card, but I assume there's probably better ways to mess with your opponent's graveyard, especially since this just gets one card.
Do you think it's fine? Do you think this is acceptable?
It seems acceptable, yeah.
Okay, so no, not restricted?
I would be surprised if this was restricted.
And you would be correct. You would be correct. Yeah, DD Crow, very solid card, actually. This card actually still sees modern play, if you can believe that. Even though it might seem like on the surface that's... you're taking like a -1 because you're effectively getting a card out of your opponent's graveyard. So like card economy wise, it's not like the best for you. But since each card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so individually powerful, sometimes hitting a really good card out of your opponent's graveyard that would generate them a lot of value is enough to interrupt their turn, and sometimes enough to actually stop their turn right in its tracks. And so DD Crow is a card that has seen plenty of ubiquitous play throughout Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history. And for being one of the first hand traps that they ever printed, it's a pretty cool card. It's pretty iconic.
Yeah, I mean, a card that can just get something out of a graveyard is a useful thing to have access to at the very least.
And let's move on to our next one. This one's cool.
Honest. Okay, it's 4 stars. It's on 1100, 1900, so it's actual stats. It's a fairy, and it says, during your main phase, you can return this face-up card from the field to your hand. During the damage step, when a light monster you control battles, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. That monster gains attack equal to the attack of the opponent's monster it's battling until end of turn. Okay, so this is 2 different things, right? First of all, you can just return this when you want during your main phase. And that's just a standalone thing. Okay, and then during damage, when one of your light monsters are fighting, you get to discard this to basically make it take out whatever it's fighting against. It gets attack equal to attack of their monster, which presumably makes it good enough to win.
Right, it's almost always going to win if Honest gets dropped in that situation.
Okay, so you can play this if you want, and it's okay, but I guess you get to just bounce it when you if you'd rather have it in your hand, and you can use it as like a pump spell. Only works when one of your monsters is battling another monster, right? Like it doesn't do anything if it's just hitting them.
Right, if it's going face, it doesn't do anything.
I know you said these cards are all at least plausible. This doesn't sound super strong to me. The ways I would want to use this, if there's like small light monsters you could play that like maybe give you value or put like kind of tokens into play, and you can use this to trade them up for something big, that seems pretty good. I don't know how often you want to just like play this and then bounce it back to your hand. That seems like if you were going to do that, you could often just not play it, but I guess maybe it's a way to like run this out if you have nothing else to run out, and then bounce it back if you're going to use it. My inclination is to say this isn't that strong, but if there's context that I'm missing, I could see it being good. It's certainly got some powerful things going on.
Okay, so final answer, you think it's fine?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is the first one. You're incorrect. If you could believe it, Honest was actually limited to 1 copy back around the time that it was printed. This was, to be fair, to help it out, some of the best decks around this time were light attribute-focused decks. For people watching, we're talking about Lightsworn and such. And Honest was just incredible because it was removal. Like you said, in the worst-case scenario, you could just drop it down, poke your opponent for 11, and bounce it back to hand. So it kind of had like this really annoying protection, you know, because you could just bounce it back to your hand and your opponent really couldn't do much about it. But for the most part, there's always this mind game when you're playing against anyone playing a light deck. And even to this day, people fear this card when they're playing up against a light focused deck. They're like, Oh man, but what if they have Honest? Like you'll just lose on the back of them having Honest. It's one of those cards that has really traumatized Yu-Gi-Oh players over the years. Incredibly good card. By modern standards, it's at 3, and it's not particularly good. But in older Yu-Gi-Oh, which is a lot more combat focused, a lot more just back and forth. Honest, it was a absolutely like format defining card. It was really strong.
Huh? Interesting. Yeah, that I would not have. Well, clearly didn't get because I guessed it the other way around.
The 1900 defense actually surprisingly is relevant as well. If you just needed a guy to like chump block and potentially like protect you, normal summonable monsters don't really have more than 1900 attack for the most part, especially when it was released. So if you needed to just buy some time, you could just set this face down, your opponent attacks into it, it flips up, they can't kill you, so they just pass the turn, and then you could bounce Honest back to your hand, and then maybe you drew a good card on the following turn to do something else with it. So a lot of flexibility with this card, and it was limited for quite some time. And once it came back to 3, people were kind of freaking out because they're like, oh god, all the light decks are going to go crazy now because Honest is legal. But yeah, very fun card. Very iconic card too for old Yu-Gi-Oh players.
This seems like good, for lack of a better word, honest gameplay where you're just like trading your monsters for theirs and getting into brawls. That I can understand that. That at least seems less. It does seem less busted than some of the cards we've seen. But I could see. I guess just trading up is pretty powerful.
Absolutely. All right, here's another cute little guy for you.
Hanewata is a 200/300 quick effect. You can discard a card. You take no effect damage this turn. So that's non-combat damage?
Correct.
Okay, so there's 2 things. One is that like Kuriboh, if there's an opposing deck that's trying to like, graviton cannon or whatever the launcher was,
the catapult turtle.
Yeah, catapult turtle. That's what it was. Do something like that to you. This could maybe stop it. The other thing is if there's a deck that has effects that damage itself, combo with those, I assume, to maybe get something really busted going. So this, I wouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I'm just going to guess it got restricted because there's probably some gross combo where you use this to stop one of your own cards from damaging you.
Interesting. Final answer?
Yeah, that's my final answer.
Yeah, this card sucks. It is actually used for the exact purpose, though, that you said, where if there are FTK decks in the format, that'll just win immediately on the first turn without you really getting to play. People will sideboard Hanewata. It's like basically the best card that does this. There's a couple, but I think Hanewata is just like the best one. So sometimes this card will see like very fringe play in the side deck for people who don't want to lose to like those particular decks. But aside from that, no one's using this for anything else degenerate. It's just a cute little card. And the fun of an Eternal format, right, is that this card was printed, 20 years ago. It could randomly come up if there's a very degenerate deck in the format that people need this card. So randomly it'll spike in price because people need it, which is very funny. All right. So you're doing pretty good. I think this one's going to be very interesting. So let's see what you think about this one.
Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness. All right. This is what?
This one's got a bit of text.
7 stars, 2,700, 2,500. It's a fiend. I have to like lean in here. When you take damage from a card your opponent controls, you can special summon this card from your hand. You must control no cards to activate and resolve this effect. So that means nothing in play. When special summoned this way, activate the appropriate effect based on the type's damage. Battle damage. Special summon 1 Emissary of Darkness token. Whoa, what a card. And this is a level 7 with attack and defense equals the amount of damage you took. Okay, so if you have nothing in play and they hit you with a monster for 2,000, you summon a 2,000.
Correct. And the Gorz
plus hit,
as well.
Yes. Or if you took effect damage, you inflict damage on your opponent equal to the number of damage you took. Oh. I know that at the start I said, it's harder to play around cards in your opponent's hand because you don't know that they're going to have them. This is somewhat telegraphed, right? Your opponent doesn't have anything in play. You always have to be thinking about this card.
Okay.
I'm going to guess this got restricted based on how powerful it is when it works and how it has a bit of a chilling effect on like what your opponent's going to do if you have no cards in play. I guess there's a bunch of ways to play around this though. I mean, you could hit them for a smaller amount of damage, and if they don't use this, maybe you just pass without hitting them for more. That's one way to potentially hose someone. Because I can imagine if you think your opponent's slow playing a card because they want to get Gorz down, and you hit them for like 1,000 and they don't use it, you could then just not attack with your 3,000 monster. I assume a legal play, right? You don't have to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to attack. Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing that like catches people by surprise when you just choose not to do something, but you're allowed to do that when you're playing around your opponent's cards. And that actually seems like a fairly effective way to play around. For effect damage, yeah, if you blast someone for a bunch, they could just play this. Though if you're killing them with that damage, this wouldn't stop you. this can't be used until after you've taken the damage. So
correct, right? So you would take the damage. So if you lose from that attack,
yeah,
the game's just over. Yeah,
this is a cool card. The restriction on having nothing in play is a big one. So that's like the biggest telegraph of this is if your opponent's not playing cards or you think that they have this. One thing I do like about this card a lot, it feels like this card minimizes being on the draw, going second. A good amount because your opponent goes first and maybe hits you with something and then you just get to play this. You didn't have an opportunity to play cards, so there's not really a big drawback. Very cool card.
Okay.
I am gonna guess it's restricted. This does seem pretty strong to me.
Final answer?
Yeah.
You are so good, LSV. You are dead on the money. First, for the record, if you love Gorz, the Edison format, the retro format I've talked to you about a couple times, this card's legal in it, and you can imagine this card is basically a format-defining card in that format because the amount of mind games that take place where you could just, on your opening turn, just pass, what's your opponent going to do? Are they going to fully commit? And if you have Gorz, like the game's just over. Gorz is the psychic damage that Gorz has caused to the game is incredible. It's actually, like you said, where it has forced people to now forever play a certain way where they always attack with their lowest attack monster first, just in case there is a Gorz, because most of the time your opponent's going to hold it for the biggest attack thing, so the token has the most possible attack stat possible, so that they can fight back on the crackback. But, like you said, you could make them think that you're going to do that, but just only attack with your weakest monster, let's say you only have 2, and just not attack with the bigger one, and now they don't get to summon the Gorz. There's a lot of mind games to be had with this card. But if Gorz does hit the field, most of the time it is a huge swing for the player who summons it, and you have to really consider, especially in Edison format I'm referring to specifically here, if Gorz comes down and you don't have an answer to it, this card will win them the game. Just 100%, because the 2700 attack stat is huge. They're going to get a giant token. So that card shadow looms over that format. By modern standards, this card's not very good. It's just been power crept kind of into oblivion at this point. But in old Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gorz was an absolute house. And even to this day, people will still attack with their smallest monsters first, just in case there is the slightest modicum of a chance that Gorz is being played. People still play with that play pattern. It's really, really funny. But awesome card. Gorz is really sick.
So what they need to do is then print a card that rewards you for attacking with your biggest monster first to really put people in the lock.
Pretty much, yeah. Some people will actually, if they have the read that their opponent has Gorz, some people will actually attack with their largest monster first because they know that, especially if they're on low enough life points that they're going to be like within lethal range, they'll attack with the larger monster first because they know they're going to drop the Gorz anyway, so they'd rather get in the extra few hundred points of damage and see Gorz rather than get in with the smaller monster. Yeah, so there's a lot of complexity with this card.
Cool card,
but really, really awesome card. Yeah. We got to get you into Edison format if you like Gorz, because man, Gorz is sick. Gorz is awesome. All right. Moving on. That one, I wouldn't really call that a hand trap because it special summons itself to the field. Most hand traps, you discard them for an effect, but I think it was worth it to show you that.
I think in spirit, it's about the same.
In spirit, it's a hand trap. Yeah. In spirit, it's a hand trap. But this might be one of the most classic hand traps in the game. So let's see what you think about
Effect Veiler. It's a 0/0, so it doesn't even do anything when you play it, looks like, I guess. During your opponent's main phase, quick effect. You can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one effect monster your opponent controls. Negate the effects of that face-up monster your opponent controls until end of this turn. So this doesn't function as a monster, right? Like,
it is a monster in spirit, let's say.
You could play it face down as a monster, I guess.
You could, if you need to chump block something. It is a body, because remember, everything has taunt in Yu-Gi-Oh! So.
Right. But 0/0 means if this was face up on the board, would it just die?
So it wouldn't just die. It would just have 0. It just loses to everything in combat,
okay.
Basically. Remember, our defense stat isn't toughness, so it doesn't die if it has 0.
Gotcha.
It just basically does nothing.
But what you can do, so an effect monster is a monster that has an effect. I mean, so not every monster is like that, but it's doing something if it has an effect.
Most of them are.
Yeah. And you can negate the effects of that face-up monster. I mean, this card seems like a very good one. Getting to stop whatever it is their monster is doing seems pretty great. So, for example, if you special summon Gorz, this could counter the effect of making the token?
That is a particular instance where Effect Veiler would not work for a couple reasons. First of all, it says during your opponent's main phase. Gorz would be being summoned in the battle phase, unless you're using the second effect where it does the damage. But also, Gorz also activates in like a window where Effect Veiler wouldn't be able to respond to it, if that makes sense. It's sort of activating while it's still in your hand, so the effect isn't activating on the field. So you don't really get the chance of Veiler.
I assume this does a pretty good job of dealing with most of the things monsters would do.
Yes, that's a fair assessment.
All right, well, I do think this card is strong. I don't think this doesn't appear to me like the card that the kind of card that would be restricted. Like maybe it is, of course, I could be wrong, but it's an answer. It's not really doing anything broken. It's trying to stop broken things. I could see it being frustrating if they draw like multiple of these, but they are trading a card to stop an effect of a monster, and they just get to keep the monster. So it kind of is card disadvantage, though obviously
it is a -1.
It can be a pretty big tempo swing if they put a lot of resources into doing something. So I'm going to guess this is both good and not limited.
All right, and you would be correct. Effect Veiler is just a phenomenal card. Some things you might have missed, actually, is that this is, as well as, everything that it does, it's also a tuner. And so now that you know what synchro monsters are, in the absolute, I wouldn't say the worst case scenario, but it has the flexibility that if you don't want to use this to negate one of your opponent's cards, if you have the ability, let's say you already have like 7 stars worth of monsters on the field, you could play Effect Veiler for your normal summon for the turn and synchro summon all that into a Stardust Dragon. So now you've actually converted this card that was a more defensive card into an offensive card. So it does have that flexibility. Being a light attribute is also quite a premium as well. Light and dark are the most supported attributes in the game typically, so just having that attribute is also very relevant. And being level 1 for the synchro capability is quite good, just because it can basically almost always synchro into something for the most part. So having that level 1 is quite good. But for the most part, people are using this to negate opponents' effects. This is like one of the first cards that could really just do this from the hand. Plenty of other cards have done this before that were trap cards or even spell cards. But this is the first one that was, almost being able to not be telegraphed as much because you don't have anything face down. Also something important, there is no once per turn clause on this. So hypothetically, if you do have multiple copies of this card in your hand, you could negate multiple of your opponent's effects. Whether or not you want to do that depends on the context, but that is something that later on they started to learn with Yu-Gi-Oh! We need to put once per turns on this, and we've talked about that in previous videos before. But never restricted, just a very solid card. Still sees modern play, actually. Effect Veiler is, it's actually because of that no once per turn restriction that Effect Veiler is a very strong card.
Yeah, this is a cool card.
It is a cool card. Very cool card. Also comes in a very beautiful rarity as well. I'll have to show you that one day. All right, but we're moving on. Next card.
Swift Scarecrow. It's a 1-star, another 0/0. It's a machine effect. When an opponent monster declares a direct attack, quick effect, you can discard this card, negate the attack, and then end the battle phase. This stops their first attack, presumably because you just use it right away, and then...
Well, it is a direct attack, so it does have to be going face. Okay. So if you have a monster on the field, let's say they have a bunch of monsters, right? They have to attack the monster first, and then the first direct attack they would declare to you, you could activate Swift Scarecrow.
Oh, okay. So the way I would imagine this got used is in a deck that doesn't have a whole lot of monsters, doesn't care about monsters that much, like maybe a combo deck or something. Because if you have nothing in play, this does just, I mean, this is actually kind of like Fog, the card I talked about. This does just stop their combat for the entire turn, right? Like you have nothing in play, you just use this to blank their first attack, and then they can't attack anymore. This is the kind of card, this is exactly like I said about Fog. It either does nothing or very little, or is like really obnoxious because there's ways to like loop it. You've got ways to bring it back from the graveyard, or ways to like, tutor up a bunch of copies of this. I guess I'm going to go, this is tough because honestly, it's like a coin flip for me. Like this card is, I have a hard time deciding. I'm going to go with this did get restricted. This did get limited.
Okay. You don't seem super confident, though.
Oh, I'm definitely not.
And there's a reason you shouldn't be, because this card is never been restricted. Okay. Swift Scarecrow is a fine card. I would say most of the ways that this card was used were twofold. Either against very aggressive metagames where the opponent would commit a lot of resources and try to put 8,000 damage on the board. When they would go into attack, then you would drop Swift Scarecrow. They've committed all their resources, and now on the crackback, you can sort of pick apart their board, and maybe they kind of went all in on that. So now Swift Scarecrow did its job, essentially, in allowing you to buy a turn so that you're now able to, actually just turn the game around entirely. Where otherwise, if a card like this didn't exist, they may not fully commit all the way. So that surprise factor there is definitely important. The other way this card was used in more degenerate ways is if you're playing against like burn decks or stall decks or Exodia decks, this just gave you another turn to draw more cards to try to find your alternate win condition, right? And so that was like the two ways that this card was used. It was never really used in like typical decks, I would say, unless I'm talking like very aggressive meta games for those watching, like Dragon Ruler format played this card, for instance. So it's a solid card, just not something that's always played all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I said,
it's like with Fog.
It can definitely go wrong, but yeah, I guess in this particular case, it did not.
Yeah. All right, let's see what you think about this card.
Droll and Lockbird. So it's a spellcaster effect, another 0/0. If a card or cards is added from the main deck to your opponent's hand, except during the draw phase, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. For the rest of this turn, cards cannot be added from either player's main deck to the hand. So you can use this once they've drawn an extra card.
Drawn an extra card or added a card from deck to hand.
Right, like tutored or whatever.
Yes.
But they get to keep that card.
They do get to keep the card.
But then they can't draw any more. This doesn't look very good to me. It certainly could shut down some kind of decks. Like there was like the Librarian fusion monster that would draw a card every time you did
Synchro monster,
that every time you synchro summoned, you drew a card. Like this would stop those decks pretty effectively, I would imagine. This is only trading. I mean, you're trading a card to maybe stop them from drawing extra cards. Do you have to use this right when they draw the extra card?
You can use it at any point as long as they've done it. So you would do it essentially in response to that card being added to their hand or drawn. So they would do that, and then the priority is passed over to you to make a response, so that you would activate this card.
Yeah, I guess my question is, so let's say you're playing against someone and they go like, draw an extra card. You then have to use this, or can you wait with this in your hand until they try to draw another card?
You can wait until they try to draw another card, but you would have to wait until after they already get that card. So you can't gotcha them.
Right, that's kind of what I'm asking, because like Magic has a lot of effects that stop you from drawing extra cards, and typically the best way to use them is they cast a spell that draws 2 cards, you play that in response to prevent those draws. This isn't really working like that.
No, this is more preemptive.
Yeah, this is going to be another one of those, if I get it wrong, that I'll chalk it up to me not knowing the context, but it doesn't look very good to me. It looks like a defensive measure that you can only play after they've drawn an extra card, and then it stops them from drawing future extra cards, but like maybe they don't have more effects that do that, or maybe they just don't use those effects this turn. What was that really annoying thing called? Like Hyper C or Maxx C? Is that it?
Maxx C.
This is a pretty good way to stop that, right?
This can stop Maxx C. That's correct. That is correct.
So that seems like a use. So I guess I don't think this card got limited. I would be surprised if that were the case. I do think it probably had some good uses, but on its face is not a very powerful.
All right, and you would be correct. So Droll and Lockbird is there is some context to this card. This card, we kind of call this like one of those like oh shit buttons, where if there are decks, think of like the Hyper Librarian combo, like you said, or any deck that has like some combo to try to draw its whole deck or to just do a lot of unfair things, right? Droll and Lockbird will enter those types of formats where people need something that is like a hard stop to these types of decks being able to do the thing that they do very well. But against like most decks, I would say like you wouldn't really want to play a card like this, because maybe they're only going to be adding 1 card to their hand for the entire turn, right? So Droll and Lockbird's never really going to get you any value. It is hilarious you picked up on the Maxx C thing, because that is actually a way to use Droll and Lockbird sort of offensively instead of defensively, because if your opponent Maxx Cs and then they draw, you can Droll them potentially, and now you can keep playing as though Maxx C weren't even there, right? There are better ways to deal with Maxx C, but theoretically, this is a way to do that. That's very funny. But neat little card, but it's just, it's kind of format dependent. But it does actually still see modern play. It is still good enough in those instances.
This is a great kind of card to have in print, which is, it's good against people doing unfair things. It's a good safety valve in case that you need it. And it really only punishes people who are trying to do things that are busted. So I like having cards like that. It's a very healthy thing to have.
Absolutely. It's almost like a silver bullet card to kind of keep some of those decks in check.
Exactly.
For sure. All right. This guy, I love this guy's artwork. This guy's cool.
The Skullmeister. This is 4 stars. It's a 1700 attack, 400 defense, fiend effect. When a card effect is activated in your opponent's graveyard, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to negate that effect. Okay, this card seems like a kind of a similar card to the DD Crow, in that like it's graveyard hate, right? It stops cards in the graveyard. What's cool about this is, presumably when they activate a card from their graveyard, they're also putting other resources into it. And so you then get to, instead of just DD crowing it and then they can never use it like preemptively, it is generally better to be reactive with and counter it, because like that you get more out of that. So yeah, this seems like a cool card. It's also got reasonable stats if you did want to play it, which is nice. I would imagine that this card saw some play and wasn't limited, but there's certainly some cards that I'm sure this is great against.
Yeah, and you'd be correct. This card is perfectly fine. I think one of the nice things about this is that compared to a lot of other hand traps, Skullmeister actually has attack points. So if you need to actually be somewhat offensive with this card, you can play it, and it actually has a reasonable sized body that it could actually, kind of hold its own weight in combat. But for the most part, yeah, this card is very comparable to DD Crow, which is, I'm glad that you made that comparison. It really just kind of depends on the types of decks that are present at any given moment and like how they function, because DD Crow, you kind of use it a bit more proactively, where Skullmeister's a bit more reactive, and depending on, which one is kind of just better at handling the certain situation. Maybe some instances you play both, right? That's the fun, is that all these cards are available to you. But a card that doesn't see a ton of play. There are very specific formats where Skullmeister is incredibly good, but I would say those are probably fewer and further between. DD Crow, between the two, is actually much stronger, if you can believe that.
Yeah, I can. I mean, it's all kind of context dependent, where like if they have cards they're using in their graveyard as resources, but they're not like activated, the Skullmeister doesn't really do anything, whereas the Crow still could break whatever that is up.
All right, we're going to take a bit of a respite here, because you mentioned it. So I think now that you've done a few of these videos, it'd be fun for you to reevaluate this card.
Yeah, so this is the infamous Maxx. It's an insect effect. It's a 500, 200. During either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, and this turn, each time your opponent special summons a monster, you draw a card. You can only use one of these per turn.
So how has your perspective shifted on this card since I first showed it to you?
I certainly understand a lot more about kind of what's going on in the game, and this card seems incredibly both obnoxious and powerful. There's a magic card that I love. I absolutely love. It's actually one of my favorite cards in the game. It's called Mystic Remora. And it's a 1-mana card, so you can play it on the first turn. And it basically says, whenever your opponent plays a non-creature spell, draw a card unless they pay 4, which is they basically can't at most points in the game.
Of course, on the first turn, no shot.
And like Maxx, this only lasts one turn, so they have to decide whether to like wait it out, right? Skip your turn effectively. And then if they have another Maxx, you're just probably too far behind, right? You lose. Remora has an upkeep that it goes away naturally in a few turns. So they're both very similar play patterns, where it puts your opponent in this bind where like, do I play cards and give my opponent extra cards, or do I just stunt my own progress and not develop my board? And I can tell you I would have loved playing with this card just because of how much I like Mystic Remora.
Well, you can. It's in Master Duel. It's legal. So
yeah, all right. It is certainly a card that seems way too strong. Like I know you said it was never banned, but limited.
Oh, this was banned. Sorry. So this was the exception to the whole video. I just wanted to throw this one in there because
I think
since
I might
we're going
have guessed it was
chronologically,
banned the first time I saw it. I don't remember.
I think you did. I think you did. Yeah. I just wanted you to reevaluate it.
But yeah, no, I mean, I can see. I now understand exactly how obnoxious this card, or at least better understand how obnoxious this card is, and. These cards are tough because it's hard to say what the right play is against them generally, and they really punish people who make the wrong decision. Where it's like, I'm going to run 3 monsters into this, and you're going to draw 3, and you're just going to just demolish me, or I'm going to skip my turn, and that's even better for you. So it's a tough card to play against, I'm sure.
It's a lose-lose situation, yeah. So it's funny because like in the Asian territories in Master Duel, the card is still legal. For us TCG players, it's not legal, and we're so happy for that because this card is just
really
obnoxious.
Obnoxious.
Yeah, very obnoxious. So much so that in the Asian territories in Master Duel, there's kind of the meme that every deck starts off with 3 Maxx and every counter in the game to counter Maxx, so you don't lose to Maxx. So like the first 17 cards of your deck are already predetermined because of that.
There was a vintage tournament in Japan, actually in Kyoto, that I went to because it was at the same time as a Pro Tour, and my friend played my deck that had 4 Mystic Remoras in it, and I watched him play a game where he played a turn 1 Mystic Remora, and his opponent had a great hand and could have made a bunch of plays, but was just like, nope, I concede, I'm done. Like,
oh no,
I can imagine Maxx leading to similar like situations.
That's how it feels. It's incredibly frustrating. Yeah. Okay. So no points for that one. I mean, you hit it right on the head the first time I showed this to you. Anyway, but now I thought it'd be interesting because now you have more context. You can really understand how frustrating this card is. But there are some cards that we will be showing you, like this one I'm going to show you next, that can potentially counter Maxx. So let's see what you think about this guy.
Psy Frame Gear Gamma, or PSY Frame Gear Gamma. It's a psychic tuner effect. It's got 1,000 attack, no defense. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must be special summoned by a card effect. When your opponent activates a monster effect, will you control no monsters? Quick effect. You can special summon both this card from your hand and one Psyframe driver from your deck, hand, or graveyard. And if you do, negate that activation. And if you do that, destroy the monster. During the end phase, banish the face-up monster special summoned by this effect. Okay, so...
I'll also show you Psyframe driver. It's just a 2,500 attack vanilla monster,
right.
For context.
Just sits in your hand because you can't play it. And then when your opponent... Again, if you have no monsters and they activate a monster effect, you get to really punish them. You get to put this into play. You get to put a Psyframe driver into play. You get to negate their activation and destroy the monster. And then the Psyframe driver, and this also goes, they both go away, right?
Correct. They both get special summoned and then they both get banished during the end phase. Yep.
All right. Well, it seems like a strong card. It would get a lot weaker when limited because if you were to put one Psyframe driver in your deck and or two maybe and like three of these, you'd feel pretty good about it. But if you could only play one of the Frame Gear Gammas, playing one frame driver for it sounds like a not great ratio. Like, because you don't really want to ever draw the Psyframe driver. It sounds
absolutely not.
Card.
No.
It is a strong effect. The thing is, this one's a little easier to play around because the dude that we saw, Gorz, because for Gorz, like you do kind of have to attack your opponent eventually. That's how you win the game. If your opponent has no monsters in play, I feel like you could kind of refrain from activating monster effects sometimes. Like obviously sometimes you still will or have to, but it's a little easier to get away with not doing that. But the punishment here is pretty big. Like if you do,
yeah, this is the first one that actually clears the monster with it instead of just negating an effect.
And lets you, gives you a Psyframe driver and the Gamma for until end of turn.
I will also let you know, if it helps your evaluation, there is a level 8 Synchro monster.
Yeah,
because Gamma is a tuner that you can make.
That was going to be kind of my next statement was like, at least Psyframe driver is 6 stars, so it looks like it'd be good fodder. But
this is a tough one.
Yeah, this one's close. This one has certainly a much higher % chance of being limited than most of the cards here, so I'm leaning towards that, but it seems like...
Is that deck requirement, like the fact you have to play the drivers, that's sort of the limiting factor for you?
That is part of that, and also the part that I imagine like you often will need to play into this, but sometimes you could just attack them, right? Like instead of activating monster effects.
Yeah, you don't have to activate monster effects.
So I'm gonna guess this did not get limited. That's going to be my guess, but I'm going to guess it.
It is incredibly good. So good that, if you could believe it, it is limited. It is, in fact, limited. It's been limited only for the past couple formats. It is an incredibly powerful card. Being able to not only negate the effect, but remove the monster has proven over time to be just incredibly strong, because now they don't have the material to use that monster for a synchro summon or any of the other extra deck, summons that we haven't gotten to yet. So removing that body as well is just a huge premium. Being able to stop, you can stop Maxx with this card. So let's say hypothetically you activate a spell card that would go on the stack to special summon a monster. As Chainlink 2, your opponent would use Maxx. Chainlink 3, you don't control any monsters yet, so you could use Psyframe Gear Gamma to negate the Maxx, and now your plays are going to go through, and you get the Gamma and the driver, so you get some more guys to mess around with as well. So being able to actually counter Maxx is one of the best aspects of this card, or any hand trap that's a monster for that matter, as long as you don't control monsters. There's just a lot of upside to this card, and it got to the point.
Hand traps too. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be on the field.
I thought it was a monster on the field. No, that makes sense.
It's monster effects in hand as well. Yeah, so this is an incredible card for your turn 0. So when your opponent's going first, just a lot of flexibility with this card, and so much so that they ended up limiting it because it's just really powerful.
Do people still play like one of these in one frame driver?
For the most part, no, but it has been seen. Okay. I will say that. People are crazy enough that they do sometimes think the one Gamma and the one bad driver is worth playing.
You could also
it really just kind of depends on the
play
format.
this without the frame driver if you really wanted to.
You do need the driver, because if you cannot summon the driver, you cannot activate the Gamma. That is part of the effect.
Gotcha. Okay, it needs its buddy. Well, yeah, that does limiting it makes it a lot worse, like more so than most cards, I would say.
Exactly. But it's crazy because we have seen in all territories, some people have just played the one, because especially in the territories with Maxx, they sometimes feel that it's worth it. So Yeah, just crazy card, though. It's interesting because this card actually took a while for people to realize how good it actually was. And then over time, it just became better and better. And now it's limited, which is kind of crazy to think. Next card. We're getting into some cool cards here. You're going to think the artwork on this one's sick.
Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. yeah, this is cool. It's a 0 attack, 1800 defense. And it's a zombie tuner effect, so it's a tuner. I now picking up on that. If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can quick effect, discard this card, reveal one card in your extra deck, then look at your opponent's extra deck, banish all cards in their extra deck with the same name as that revealed cards, and you can only use this effect once per turn. This is a very classic kind of style of card where you get to kind of go and get cards that they haven't played yet, like preemptively banish all copies of those cards. Magic, the first one was Cranial Extraction, and they're all called Cranials now. I'm sure Yu-Gi-Oh! Does the same thing. The first version of an effect kind of names that effect for a lot of people. Is this card good? When you can discard this card, reveal a card in your extra deck, and then banish all cards in their extra deck. So they have to control more monsters, but that doesn't seem like a huge drawback. Like, it means that when you're going first, I guess this card's certainly worse, but on the when you're going second, this card, you could just use it very easily. This looks like a pretty good reactive card. Like, if there's a really powerful extra deck card that a lot of people are playing, A, you could put it in your extra deck with no intention of playing it, just to use it for Ghost Reaper, and B, it could be really strong to be able to banish whatever their combo piece is. I don't think this got limited, but I bet it really cuts down on the viability of some really obnoxious decks.
Final answer?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people would think the same thing. It's funny because, like, in practice, Ghost Reaper just doesn't work out as well as you would think it would. Like, yes, there are the instances where if there's a lot of the same deck in the format, like say you have a tier 0 strategy that's just by far and away the best deck, everyone's playing it, Ghost Reaper in those instances seems really good because you're already playing the cards that you would Reaper out of your opponent's extra deck anyway to cut off their plays. It kind of just plays out that it's like, it's fine, but there's so many times where if you don't see Ghost Reaper when you absolutely need to, like in the first turn or two of the game, it ends up being incredibly, incredibly bad because later on it's going to have like virtually no utility. There are instances where, don't get me wrong, where it will see play, maybe for the side deck specifically, and some people, like you said, will play cards in their extra deck that may not benefit their strategy at all, but they want to stop maybe whatever the best deck is, so they'll play that best combo piece so that they can Reaper it out of their extra deck. It's really good if you can actually pull it off, but there are some instances where decks are so resilient that even if you hit, like, you know, maybe their best combo piece out of the extra deck, they don't care. Like, they can still win the game anyway because the engine of their deck is so strong that it doesn't matter. So it's a very contextually good card, but a lot of people, like, they'll play it and think it's the best thing ever, but then when they actually play with it, they realize, I think there's just better cards I could play in place of it.
This is so funny because you could have, I could have taken everything you said and replaced the Ghost Reaper with the Magic version, and it would have all been true. These effects are typically overvalued by an incredible amount. People love the ability to go, I'm going to go take this card out of your deck, and you're never going to get to play it. But it's actually just not that good. You have to preemptively use it. You're also expending a card to banish cards they may never even need or use. And overall, these effects, they're a great card to keep, or a great effect to keep printing because people love them, but they're one of those cards that are extremely sought after or like extremely desirable. People like them, these effects, and they're not very good. And that's actually not a bad place to be. It's good to make cards like that.
Yeah, and I think, like, at times, like, it's a fine card. So it's, yeah, I would agree with all that. That's very funny, though, how it's an exact parallel to Magic with that card you were mentioning. Cranial Extraction, is that what you said?
That was the original, the first version of that. Well, I guess Lobotomy was even the OG of that, but Cranial Extraction was where it really, like, became popular, and it was overvalued by most people, I would say.
I will say, though, as well with Ghost Reaper, as well as several of these next cards, these are called the Ghost Girls because they all, like, they're sort of all, like, part of a similar theme. You're going to notice a lot of similarities, but Ghost Reaper is also a tuner. So similar to Effect Veiler, it does have some dual utility where it could potentially be used for synchro monsters if you absolutely have to. And having 1800 defense compared to something like Effect Veiler, which had 0, if you need to wall up with it, it's not the end of the world. There are times where you could maybe block an attack with it, and that's fine. But continuing on with the Ghost Girls, here's the next one.
Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So this is, again, 3 stars and a tuner. It's a psychic effect. Again, 0 attack, 1800 defense. During each player's turn, when a monster on the field activates his effect, or when a spell/trap card that is already face up on the field activates its effect, you can send this card from your hand or field, to the graveyard, destroy that card on the field, and you can only use this effect of Ghost, Ogre, and Snow Rabbit once per turn. So when something on the field activates this effect, this can destroy that card, but it doesn't counter the effect.
So I will help you out a little bit here. In the instance of destroying a monster, it would not counter the effect. However, in the instance of if there is a continuous spell or trap card on the field that is activating its effect, mechanically, if a continuous spell or trap card is destroyed before it resolves its effect, it resolves without effect. Okay. So it would sort of counter these continuous spells and trap cards. Also, field spells, same thing. They need to be face up to resolve fully. So Ghost Ogre can also stop those.
Okay, so it's a pretty good counter to field spells or traps, and an okay counter-ish to monsters where it at least takes out the monster, though the effect still happens.
Right, the effect can still happen. And keep in mind, like you've seen with some of these cards, sometimes they have multiple effects. So maybe the first effect will resolve, but you stop them from resolving the second effect because the monster will get destroyed before they get the opportunity.
Yeah, this card seems pretty legit. Like I think if there's like having something that can blow up trap cards, or counter their effect. And also you could do it from your hand or field. So you could even play this and have it out there defending you and then just, sacrifice it when you need to.
Sure.
It doesn't seem like a card that would be limited to me, but it does seem like a card that has some decent utility.
And you'd be correct because that's exactly it. It's got decent utility. Ghost Ogre's weird. It's kind of out of like the whole Ghost Girl, or even as far as all hand traps are concerned go. Ogre can be especially devastating because it does destroy the card. But it requires like the right decks to be being played for Ghost Ogre to be really potent and effective. So sometimes that's the case, sometimes not. So Ghost Ogre will hop in and out of formats appropriately. The fact that it can also be sent from the field is relevant because Psychic type monsters specifically have a spell that special summons them directly from the deck. Not every archetype or type or attribute in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has that. So Ghost Ogre actually meets the criteria for that. So in a pinch, you could use it to get it onto the field so that its effect is kind of primed if you need to like stop something your opponent's doing, or if you want to use it as a tuner to synchro it off into something as well. Just a lot of flexibility on this card. So I think it's probably better than Reaper in a lot of instances, but still situational, if that makes sense.
But my understanding now of how the Yu-Gi-Oh! Like kind of the chain works, the comments on your last video were very illuminating. You couldn't use that spell to put this into play, then use this to stop something, right?
They would have to use something. So let's say use the spell to put this into play. If they did something in response to you activating that spell as Chain Link 2, then no, you wouldn't be able to Ghost Ogre it. But after you summon out the Ogre, if they do something that Ogre is a viable target to destroy, then you could.
But there's not like a quick effect where they activate a trap card. In response, you quick effect, put this into play from your deck, then use this. Like, that's not something that can...
Correct. That is, I think, one of the biggest differences between the stack and chain links is that once a chain is resolving, nothing else can be put onto the chain.
Right. Whereas Magic lets you just keep inserting things there.
That's definitely a big difference. For a lot of effects, I think we have a much different game if that were the case.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going with the Ghost Girls.
All right, this is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This is a little cheerier, this one. So, again, 3 stars, zombie tuner effect with no attack and 1800 defense. When a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, quick effect, you can discard this card to negate that effect. Okay, so add a card from the deck to the hand, special summon from the deck, send a card from the deck to the graveyard, and you can only use this once per turn. Oh, well, this one's quite a bit more powerful, I would imagine. Negates card draw or tutoring, getting something from the deck, special summoning from the deck, or sending a card from the deck to the graveyard. Again, this doesn't feel like a card that should be limited, but this one's closer than the other two for sure, because this, if there's a meta game where this is frequently countering a lot of the things that are out there, like that could get a little bit tiresome. But I would still guess this wasn't limited, but is good.
And you are correct. This is actually maybe one of the best hand traps Yu-Gi-Oh's ever made. And you didn't pick up on it, but it does counter Maxx, which is one of the best reasons why people like it so much. I remember I did a video when this card was like first printed on every single card at the time that Ash Blossom stopped. And I think it stopped something like 1/5 of the card pool or something ridiculous, because when you add all 3 of those bullet points together, it stops so many different cards in the game that there's almost nothing bad that it can stop at the end of the day. You're going to find something. Now, I don't want to say that every deck has played 3 copies of this card ever since it was printed, but it is probably just like the most generically good hand trap that maybe they've ever printed aside from like Maxx C, just because it has so much utility and application. And even though it is a -1, most of the time, if you're stopping your opponent from getting advantage as well, you're making them waste a card too. So for a lot of times it goes 1 for 1. Sometimes it can even go 2 for 1, depending on if they have to like pay a cost or something like that as well. And an incredibly good card. And I think this is a very good card for the game just in general.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I didn't think this was limited and is just because cards like this, answer cards, typically aren't. And it's good to have some amount of them. Yes, sometimes this can stop like kind of them from drawing multiple cards or whatever. At its core, this is going to be like a 1 for 1 or sometimes even 0 for 1 if you're like stopping an effect off of a monster. Just the ceiling on that is just like, it can only be so good. Like at best, It's trading for one of their things, but that's a really good thing, especially in a game as busted as Yu-Gi-Oh! Having some kind of stop gaps to stop you from just dying on turn 1 every game is a pretty good thing.
Yeah, see, it's balanced. It's balanced.
Yeah,
anyway, let's go to the next Ghost Girl.
This is Ghost Belle and Haunted Mansion. Oh, I've heard this story. This is, again, 3 stars, 0 attack, 1800 defense, zombie tuner effect. When a card or effect is activated that includes any of these effects, you can discard this card to negate that activation. Add a card or cards from the graveyard to the deck, hand, or extra deck. Okay, so this stops you from getting cards out of the graveyard. Special summon a monster card from the graveyard or banish cards from the graveyard.
And you're probably starting to notice a trend here with how these cards work.
She definitely does not want anything leaving or going into the graveyard. Again, not limited, for all the reasons I said previously. This one looks worse than Ash Blossom, but there's a lot of room under Ash Blossom. So
sure,
it looks like a fine card. It's a good answer card if if your opponent or the metagame, for example, has a lot of cards that this would stop. That's where this card would get good. But it doesn't look like it's too broken or out of control or anything.
And yeah, you'd be correct. This is, another one that's always fighting for space against DD Crow or Skullmeister, for instance. I'd say probably more DD Crow than Skullmeister. But Ghost Belle it is the anti-graveyard card. And again, it is very situational. Too, right? It could, yes, actually. And that does happen. And it's when there are extremely graveyard-focused decks in a particular format. Ghost Belle will see play in both the side deck as well as even the main deck if there's multiple decks that really just lose to this card. Like you said, less generic than Ash Blossom, but still a very strong card nonetheless.
It could also be good in graveyard decks to stop them from messing with your graveyard, I would imagine.
It could. It could. Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break from the Ghost Girls. There's a few more because chronologically, this card actually came out next.
Infinite Impermanence. This is a trap card. Target one face-up monster your opponent controls. Negate its effects until end of turn. Then if this card was set before activation and is on the field at resolution, that's just kind of the normal text, right? Of like, if this card, like that's how all of them work if they're on the field at resolution.
It'll make sense when you read the rest of the card.
For the rest of this turn, all other spell trap effects in this column are negated. If you control no cards, you can activate this from your hand. Oh, I see. So the activating from your hand, that means you wouldn't get the second part of the effect.
Correct. Yes.
But it negates an effect otherwise. And then what is column? Is that the placement on the playmat kind of?
Yeah, I don't know if we ever covered this actually. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, unlike Magic, we don't have infinite board space. We only have 5 monster zones and 5 spell and trap zones. So we call them columns. So they're across from one another. So it would be your spell and trap zone closest to you, then your monster zone. Then on my side, it would be my monster zone and then my spell and trap zone. So those are broken up into 5 columns because there's 5 of each. And so everything in the column that you set infinite impermanence in, if you activate it while it was set, everything in that column gets negated for the rest of the turn.
This looks like a pretty good answer, and sometimes you can really get them. Do you have to fill the columns in order?
No, you can set them wherever you want. And that is part of the gameplay where there are, for instance, because infinite impermanence is in the game, maybe you don't want to set your trap card in the same column as your opponent's set card because all of a sudden, if that card's infinite impermanence, you're now going to have that card disabled essentially for the turn if they activate this at any point. Right. So playing around your opponent's columns is actually a core part of the game.
Yeah, this card certainly kind of demonstrates that. Yeah, This looks like a good card. It looks like it's got that little shell game of like you don't want to end up facing theirs. But on the other hand, if you had an infinite impermanence, you would definitely want to set it in the same column as theirs. So
exactly, you could do that as well. If there's a card you want to negate, you can set your imperm into that column. Yep.
Yeah, I do think this card is good. I don't think it got limited, but this one does seem like it's got some good strength and flexibility. You get to play this from your hand. It's a good card when you're going second, and it seems fairly powerful, but not a card I would imagine got restricted.
And you would be correct. Infinite Impermanence is still a card that sees plenty of play today. One of the advantages of it is that it is a trap card. So for instance, Psyframe Gear Gamma, let's say, can't negate it because it's not a monster effect, right? And so for the most part, most hand traps, even though they're called hand traps, are monsters.
Right.
Infinite Impermanence, I believe, might be one of the first trap cards that you can activate from the hand in a way such as this, so that it functions like a hand trap.
Yeah, that's a lot of extra flexibility for sure.
Yeah, having the fact that it is specifically a trap card is very good. And it's cool because if you have it in your opening hand, and let's say you're going first instead of going second, you can set it face down and get the bonus effect. But if you're going second and you really need to stop your opponent's play, you can just fire it out of your hand because obviously you're not going to have anything on the field, and you're perfectly okay with just negating something your opponent has. So it's like a trap version of Effect Veiler, if you will.
One of the things that I'm learning as we look at all these cards, is actually, I'm really glad that you chose these for this episode, is I can see how there's a lot of back and forth in games, and it's not just someone, running away with the game because they went first. A lot of these cards fight against that, and I think that's necessary for it to be a good game.
Yeah, I will say I still think a lot of games can end very quickly in the first few turns, but within each of those turns, a lot is happening because we have these types of cards in the game as a result. And it took the game getting to this point for that to be the case, but I think a lot of people always make the meme of like, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh! Ends in like the first 1 or 2 turns. That could be true, but there's a lot of play happening within those first turns that it's like, maybe a turn might take 10 minutes, but that's because you're each firing these effects at each other to try to stop the other person, right? And so it's, I think it's just our turns are different than most other card games.
Yeah, this reminds me a bit of Vintage, the oldest format in Magic, which it has fewer turns than other formats, but the game length is still comparable because there's so much going on in those turns. And I think that's totally fine. What you don't want is the person going first making 90% of the game actions, but these cards really do prevent that. So even if the game lasts 3 turns, if those turns are all highly interactive, you have a satisfying game.
Exactly. We're in the home stretch. We have a few more, and we're going to be showing you some more interaction. Let's see what you think about this card. This one's cool.
Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. It's like all the other Ghost Girls, same stats and all that.
Yep.
During either turn except the end phase. Quick effect. You can discard this card, apply this effect this turn, and you can only use the effect of Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood once per turn. Each time your opponent special summons an effect monsters during the main phase or battle phase, you gain life points, I assume LP is life points, equal to that monster's attack. If you do not gain life points by this effect, your life points are halved during the end phase. Okay. You could discard this card in response to your opponent's special summoning. Yes?
Correct. So if your opponent activates an effect to special summon a monster, whether it's the monster's effect, a spell card, what have you, you could chain this in response so that you will guarantee gain life points off of at least that one special summon.
Okay, and then if you somehow use this card and then didn't gain the life, you actually just lose a bunch of life. That seems like an unnecessary drawback because this card doesn't even look that good to me.
Okay.
Maybe there's ways to use that extra life in paying life points in a way that's like really good. But I guess this is a little bit like Maxx C in that they special summon, you play this, you gain like 2,000 or 2,700 life, and then they have a choice. Do I play more monsters this turn and give you more life, or do I just pass the turn? I would much rather draw a card than gain a bunch of life. In fact,
sure.
An age-old question.
Well, Maxx C's banned for context.
True,
so,
because it's too broken. But an age-old question is, how much life would you have to gain before you choose that over drawing a card? And the answer is usually pretty high. So I'm gonna guess this card's not good. And by extension, not limited.
So it's so funny because your thought process is how everyone perceives this card. It's very interesting how in practice how this ended up working out for a couple things. There's one piece of context you're slightly missing.
I'm glad to learn that I'm wrong because that's more interesting.
So Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood, the thing is about this card is that with Yu-Gi-Oh! You made the Maxx C comparison. I think that's very accurate because a lot of people want to compare this card to Maxx C for the same reason. You're not giving your opponent any card advantage. So on paper, this card doesn't really do much. But because you're able to special summon so much in Yu-Gi-Oh!, giving your opponent like 10 to 20,000 life points can actually sort of be a liability because you're not getting the card economy immediately from the monsters being special summoned. You're getting the card economy from getting extra turns because now your opponent can't actually kill you because most decks are designed to, let's say, do 8,000 damage to be able to kill the opponent because there's very little life gain in Yu-Gi-Oh! Unless it's built into cards that are already good, let's say. And so Now, all of a sudden, your opponent is in this situation where they did their thing and it was cool, but now they have to win the game, and it's going to take them a few turns to actually whittle the opponent down from like 15,000, 20,000 life points to actually kill them. So the opponent actually gets a couple of turns to draw some more cards and then fight back on the crackback, and they're not really in much of a rush, which is like the interesting part about this. Where Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood gets degenerate is that the way that our tournament time rules function is that at the end of time, we don't get extra
sudden
turns.
death sort of thing, like life totals.
Whoever has the most life points when time gets called wins the game.
And if it's tied?
So what if it's tied, it's a draw.
Oh, okay.
Unless it's top cut and then you play out differently,
Sure,
but
yeah.
for just Swiss rounds. So what happens is when game 3 comes around, people might side in Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood with like 5 minutes left on the clock, and then their opponent starts playing, they get dogwooded, and now all of a sudden the opponent's in this like just absolutely miserable situation because they want to be able to put up their board to try to win the game, but if they do that, they're automatically going to lose from doing nothing because their opponent's going to be on like 10,000 more life points than them. And it doesn't feel great. So Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood ends up being
in Yu-Gi-Oh?
You do have to just play at like an adequate pace. If you get called for slow play, you get a warning, and then after a couple warnings, you just get
like
a game
exactly
loss
the same
and
as
match
Magic.
loss.
And in my
Same as
experience,
Magic, I imagine.
if there's 5 minutes left in the round and your opponent does not want to move too quickly, that's pretty hard to like stop any of that.
Yeah. So I thought this card would be interesting to show you just for like the
I personally
the
play
tournament
around
application of it.
by just being one of the fastest players and never going to time. But
The thing is, I think with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that sometimes decks just require a lot of execution in the inputs of all the cards that you're playing in order to do what it is they're trying to do. And so sometimes you are racing against the clock and you're only able to do actions so quickly. So this card can get a bit murky, which is a bit unfortunate about it. But in the instance of if you take the time aspect out of it, it is kind of an interesting card to compare to Maxx in a lot of ways. But I thought you'd find this card very interesting.
that
tournament
makes a lot of sense to me, and I totally get it. It wasn't limited though, right?
No.
So like, how good was it? Was it actually good, or was it like
it still sees play? Still sees play,
okay.
actually. Yeah. I will say it is primarily for the time rules, but there are instances where some of the top players do decide that against certain decks, this card basically makes it so that they can't get OTK'd by the opponent's deck, and it actually is worth them running for strategic purposes that are outside of trying to cheese the time rules. So that's sort of where this card is at currently.
All right, yeah, that does make sense to me.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's the way that our time rules are. Unfortunately,
like it's just extremely difficult.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap up the Ghost Girls. This is actually the last one.
Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill. So it's same stats as the rest. If your opponent special summons a monster or monsters face up, except during the damage step, you can discard this card and then target one of those face up monsters, negate its effects until end of turn. Also, if that face up monster leaves the field this turn, its controller takes damage equal to its original attack, and you can only use this effect once per turn. So I'm going to ignore the damage step thing for the moment.
Don't worry about that. Yeah.
If your opponent special summons a monster, you can discard this, target that monster, negate its effects, and you get a pretty big bonus if you kill that monster this turn. Or if the monster
I will say
dies
for
in
a bit of
combat.
context here, similar to synchro summoning, how you would take the monsters to bring out a guy, there are several other extra deck mechanics that do a similar thing where you take 2 or more things, do something with them, then get other guy. So making that monster lead the field is not impossible, just for context.
Yeah, this again looks okay. There seems like there's a lot of ways to negate effects of monsters. So why would you play this one? I guess the answer would be that you get to punish them if the monster leaves the field. So like you said, against like synchro fusion type summoning effects, like this could be pretty annoying for them. Yeah.
We're also going through 25 years of Yu-Gi-Oh, so
yeah, that totally. This card looks certainly playable, up to even good, depending on what the metagame is like, and does not strike me as one that would need to be limited.
And that's exactly what it is. She is. I would say for the most part, people would actually consider Effect Veiler better. And the reason for that is Effect Veiler is not once per turn. So one of the problems with this card is that because it is once per turn, if you draw multiple copies, one of those cards is effectively dead in your hand if your opponent's playing a super heavy combo deck, right? But Effect Veiler, you can use multiple times. So if you draw multiples, it's actually perfectly okay. The life point thing can matter, potentially, especially with time rules and stuff. That's not like inconceivable. But for the most part, people would probably play Effect Veiler first, and then if they want more Effect Veilers, they would probably look to Infinite Impermanence as like the next best one. And then if they want even more Effect Veilers, they'd probably look to Ghost Mourner as like the third best one. But it is all contextual on what's good at any given moment. But it's just more cards to give people more options that kind of do the same thing in a different way, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. This is a healthy effect to have. You're going to want to print a lot of them.
Yeah.
You got to give them different bells and whistles to make them, different from each other.
All right, let's get away from the Ghost Girls now because we wrapped those up. Only a couple of cards left here, and we've saved some of the best for last. I'm excited to see what you think about these.
Nibiru, the Primal Being. How many stars is that? Is that 10?
That is 10.
Yeah. It's a 3,000 attack, 600 defense rock slash effect.
11, actually. Sorry, it's 11.
11? Okay, yeah. I was like squinting. I was like, you know what? You could just tell me. I'm sure you know. During the main phase, if your opponent normal or special summoned 5 or more monsters this turn, quick effect, you contribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible. And if you do, special summon this card from your hand, then special summon 1 Primal Being rock light attack defense equal to your opponent's field, and this opponent's attack and defense become the combined original attack and defense of the attributed monsters, and you can only use this once per turn. Okay, I gotta reread this.
So it's a giant meteor. It's a giant meteor.
Okay, so if your opponent special summoned 5 or more monsters, you get to attribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible. Oh, does that include theirs? Oh, okay, and then you summon a 3,000 attack, and then they get something that's as big as all the attributed monsters.
Correct. So they have to do a bit of math there, unfortunately, but yes.
Speaking of math, someone in your comment section linked the like linear equation cannon, and it's just like, is that a real card? Like that's a real card in a normal
I was going to
set?
show you that card one day. Damn it. All right. But it's
I know.
Okay. You got to see it anyway.
I really try
It's
not
fine.
to spoil myself. I try not to look
Sure,
at Yu-Gi-Oh cards
sure.
now, but I had to see that one, and it was just like, it blew
That
my
one's
mind.
insane. Yeah. There's actually multiple of those
Yeah,
cards.
I
It's
saw
not
the
even
like
just one.
the second one too. The like
simultaneous equation cannon.
Yeah, it's like
and that was playable. That was playable.
unbelievable.
Which is insane.
Just
Unbelievable. Yeah.
This card. So the thing is, though, they still get a token equal to the stats of all the monsters they lost. So they didn't really like they lost all the abilities of their creatures or their monsters, but they still get like the stats, right? They don't lose the stats.
Well, think of it. I want to help give you some context
Sure.
to this. Think of it this way, right? Let's say you go special summon guy, synchro summon those two into third guy. Maybe you special summon a fourth monster and then synchro summon those two cards
They're not going to
again
get that
into a
many
fifth
stats
monster.
because they only end up with one monster at the end or two monsters at the end. Even if
It depends on the deck.
Yeah.
Some can go wide and play like 5 guys on the field. So the stats of the token can be all over the place.
Right.
It could be like 10,000 sometimes. Sometimes it could be like 2,000. It really just depends on the type of deck you're using this against.
But the most important part, at least from what my understanding here, is that it effectively strips all the abilities off because they're just giving a big vanilla token.
Essentially, yes. It's effectively a board wipe that leaves them with a monster at the end of it all.
Yeah, but you also get this. You get a 3,000.
Correct. You get the rock.
Yeah.
You get the rock.
This card looks sweet. I like it. I'm a fan of this card.
A lot of people like this card.
It doesn't seem to me as one that would need to be limited because the effect, I don't know how often that would occur, though. It sounds like it's actually probably pretty often that people are jumping through all these hoops and summoning 17 things.
Yep.
My guess is that it's good, but I could see this being limited. The other thing, though, is if this is a commonly played card and you're worried about it, like, you could often just stop at like the fourth monster and maybe not go all the way.
You could.
I think this card is good, not great, but good, and I don't think it got limited.
Okay. Nibiru is awesome. And it's, like you said, people will actually engineer their decks or their combos so that they can either stop on a fourth summon so that Nibiru is a dead card in the opponent's hand. They will find a way to put up a monster that has the ability to negate the effect of another monster. So that they're allowed to go past 5 summons, and then if the opponent were to try to Nibiru them, they can just negate the effect with one of their monsters they may have on the field. Nibiru was actually a card that was designed, typically how it works is cards get designed in the OCG, in the Asian territories, and then we get them several months later. But Nibiru was actually designed from the TCG first as a way to they sort of looked at the way the game was going and they thought, what are some cards that we can print for the game that are going to help sort of give people more tools for going second. And Nibiru was, in fact, one of those cards. And so it's a card that now people to this very day still have to play around and consider, ooh, if I go past that 5 summons, and there's a lot of mind games you can do with it too, because you can like be sitting there looking at your opponent like, oh, how many summons have you done? That's your 5th summon? Oh, okay. And you could not have the Nibiru at all. But they're going to think that you do, so they're going to try to play around it, right? So very, very fun card. But you're correct. This card is perfectly healthy for the game. There are some decks that just get completely blown out by this, but it's a card that you have to respect.
That's on them.
it is on them. Yeah, that's a skill issue at that point. But a very, very cool card. People love Nibiru.
I like it. Very cool card.
Very fun card. Very cool card. Speaking of these custom cards, this is actually one of the same cards that was in the same set.
Dimension Shifter. So 6 stars. It's a 1200 attack, 2200 defense. It's a spellcaster effect. If you have no cards in your graveyard, quick effect. You can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. Until the end of the next turn, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. Oh, this is pretty powerful, but you kind of have to kick things off with this. Like it stops working pretty quickly. This looks like a really powerful hoser against like specific decks, maybe with some minor like combo potential if there was something that like you wanted your cards banished instead of sent to the graveyard,
sure.
But that seems pretty thin. I'm going to guess this is like a marginal playable and not a card that, like in some metagames, this is good to have, but it's not a card that sees like a ton of play.
So it's interesting because Dimension Shifter is a card released at the same time as Nibiru, actually. Everyone loved Nibiru at first when it came out. It was a very played card. Shifter was a card that people kind of set to the side because, oh, I have to use this on my very first turn because I can't have cards in my graveyard. And so it saw very niche play. So it is a card that didn't really do much. As the game aged and we got more graveyard crazy shenanigan decks that came out, people started to looking to Shifter as one of those like, oh shit buttons that it's like, we really, really need to play this card. And so there are a few decks that can take advantage of the fact that the cards get banished. And then now it's to the point where Dimension Shifter is so annoying. It's really only played in the decks that are able to just be anti-meta decks versus the graveyard-oriented decks, if you will. And so people just hate it because it's effectively just like a turn skip and for no real skill. You kind of just drew this card and you're going to drop it on the first turn. And it's like, great, my deck doesn't function. I can't play the game. So it's this like floodgate type effect that kind of just isn't very fun to play against. I guess unless you're the one playing it, then maybe it's fun. But it's a card that people are crying out to get banned now, as a matter of fact, just because it's just so frustrating. And but it's still perfectly legal. It's at 3. People really don't want to see it anymore though because they are very sick of it.
This card it's so funny how many overlaps are or crossovers. This card is about as close to Leyline of the Void as you can get. It's a magic card that if it starts in your opening hand, you can put it into play, and any card that would go to their graveyard is banished. So,
and is there just that collective sigh where they're like, oh, here we go. Turn 1 Leyline of the Void is like similar to that, I'm guessing.
The difference is that Leyline you would only side in against really heavy graveyard decks, so it's been a pretty healthy part of the metagame, but it is frustrating when they play it because it does feel like it's a no-skill thing. Like, they just had it in their opening hand. Of course they did.
They just had it.
You know?
Exactly. I mean, at least in our game, everything's already free, right? But I imagine in Magic, that card actually costs something.
Right? Yes, it costs 4,
exactly.
So having it be free.
Oh, it costs 4. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
it's overcosted because, like, the joke is it would probably cost 2 or 3 mana. You can get a similar effect for 2 mana, but you want to gamble on getting the free part. You have to pay if you don't get it for free.
Got it. So, yeah, that's Hand Traps, LSV. What do you think?
Awesome. This has actually been one of my my favorite episodes that we've done. It's a good way to close things out for a couple months here because
I think so.
A lot of cool interaction, and I say if I start playing Yu-Gi-Oh, it will be solely your fault. So we've only got you to blame. But this has been a blast.
Well, I'm glad you had a lot of fun. Best of luck with the twins, and we will see you very soon, I guess.
Sounds great. Cheers.
So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shoutouts to Shadow1317, Tim00x3, MBT Play Medolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, Dan the Man Hoban, Little Fade Leaf, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Flannel Daddy, Twinkle Muncher, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, MBT Cancel Bio Community soon, Cancel Bio Committee soon, Cancel Bio Player soon, Wonder Waffle, Main Phase 2 Synchro on that thing, Daniel Howell, Life Keeps Using Solemn Judgment on My Hopes and Dreams, and Naveed Mandavi. Thank you so much again for watching, and we will see you next time.